Chapter 21, Section 2, Rise of the Cities. How did the Industrial Revolution change life in the cities? So the things that you should be able to do by the end of this chapter is summarize the impact of medical advances, how cities changed by 1900, and then working class struggles and the way that's going to eventually lead to improved conditions for workers. So when we look at medicine, there's a few different things coming into play here. One is the agricultural revolution that we had talked about leads to a better diet. And then you couple that with science beginning to understand the role that dirty utensils, unclean blankets play, and the role that you need to have for sanitation. You have a much lower death rate. So when you look at the fight against disease, there's a couple of things that are going on, and these are happening kind of throughout Europe at the time, is more and more they're beginning to understand that there are these tiny microscopic things that we can't really see that cause disease. And as they get better at this, and then as you get a handful of people, for example, Pasteur, Koch, and then John Snow, they're able to prove that there's a link between these unseen germs and getting sick. And that's really going to help figure out how to make vaccines, or the differences between viruses and bacteria. And all of that's going to begin to form and get better as time goes. Now, they got a long ways to go before they figure out the difference between a virus and a bacteria, but at least they're moving in that right direction. So with this hospital care, they go to cleanliness is next to godliness. So the fact that they are starting to use antiseptics, that they're starting to make sure that they clean things out, that they prevent infections. All of those types of things are going to make hospitals a much better place to go. And you're going to have fewer people who are dying from these things, and then they're able to live into an older age. They're able to survive, have more. So all of these things are going to work together to improve healthcare and contribute to this population explosion. So when we look at city life, one of the problems that they're running into, especially in these old European cities, and even some of the older cities on the east coast of the United States, is they just kind of grew up organically. There wasn't a plan. It's kind of like, well, we'll just kind of keep building in this direction. And what you've got is you've got these very narrow streets that aren't equipped for modern transportation. They were fine for walking, and all of these original cities needed to be walking cities. You had to be able to get everywhere you wanted to go by walking, whether it be church or school or the grocery store, whatever, to work and home. You had to be able to walk there. Well, now that we got modern transportation, that kind of goes out the window. So especially in some of these older cities, you start to see them tear down the old buildings, tear up the old streets, and replace them with these wide boulevards and public buildings, and tearing down the tenements and trying to get a little bit better. One of the other things that you see is the rich and the middle class, especially upper middle class, begin to move to the outskirts of the cities into the suburbs, and then the poor live in the inner city right next to the factories. So you're going to start to see this differentiation of classes based on where they live. Other things that are going to change, again, technology leads to all kinds of improvement. So one, you've got sidewalks, as they put in these wide boulevards, you're able to get different places. With street lights, not those gas lamps anymore. Those gas lamps were pretty dangerous, but with street lights, you're able to light the city at night relatively safely, and that's going to help the police force and cut crime. Especially if you watch that Jon Snow, the Pump Street extra credits video, one of the things they really figure out is sewage. Human sewage is horrible in terms of carrying microbes, and so by having these underground sewers and taking that sewage away from the drinking water and out of the city, that's going to help cut death rates. And then the other thing you need to do is, as these cities become more crowded, you need to build up, because you can't go out very much further, at least, because it gets kind of impractical. So then you start getting skyscrapers. So if we look at the city life and for the urban poor, these slum-like conditions, it's extremely overcrowded. You've got these tenement buildings where you've got multi-families living in one room. That's kind of the downside of the city life. Now, on the upside of the city life, some of the things that lure people there is it's more exciting. There's more things to do. This is also where people are working. And then those social, recreational, educational opportunities that you can find in the bigger cities that you can't find in the rural areas. And so all of those things are going to factor together to cause urbanization, this rapid growth of cities and these big, huge cities. One of the things that will happen over time is through the Industrial Revolution, you start to see mutual aid societies that are going to eventually form into kind of labor unions. So these mutual aid societies did all kinds of different things to help the urban poor. But once you get legalized labor unions where workers are united with each other, they're strengthened numbers, they're able to use those strengthened numbers to get more money, better working conditions. One of the key tools that labor unions have is work stoppage. They can go on strike. They can shut down an entire business. That doesn't go over very well, and you really see a negative reaction and these strike busters that kind of pop up. For the United States, it's the group called the Pinkertons. They would a lot of times get hired by big company owners to come in and bust up strikes. They were kind of a rough and tumble crew, but the other thing you start to see is the government moves away from laissez-faire capitalism, and they start to have regulation and reform. And it kind of takes a long time, but for example, they start to pass child labor laws where kids under the age of 10 aren't allowed to go into the workforce. Now that takes a lot longer in the United States. They're pretty resistant to telling parents what they can and can't do with their children. But you do start to see that. You start to see them limiting the number of hours that workers can work, especially in really dangerous places like mines. So little by little, bit by bit, the government's going to get involved. The other thing you start to see is, over time, a gradual rise in the standard of living. So in other words, people are able to not just be able to afford necessities of life, but they're also able to get other things that are just nice to have kind of things. The one problem is that the gap between the workers and the middle class is going to really widen. So that standard of living didn't really increase much for the working class, but as more and more people are moving into that middle class, their standard of living is really increasing.